What a wonderful day!
Very excited to chat with you, Eric, for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I watched it, or rewatched it, I should say, earlier today, and I mean, it's still just such a not just beautifully or visually beautiful film, but also a very narratively beautiful film. Before I dive into certain sequences, I'd love to start first. You've been with the franchise since War. I'm not sorry, not since War, since Rise, and you've now worked
Nice,
with
yeah.
three different directors: Rupert, Matt, and now Wes. What is it about Wes that maybe he brought something different to how you approached the visuals than what Rupert and Matt brought to the field?
I think, I mean, it's been obviously working on all of these films has been fantastic for all sorts of different reasons. And the thing that was really interesting with Wes is he comes from our world, I guess. I mean, he got his Maze Runner films off the back of a 3D animated film that he did himself. And so the world of visual effects and 3D animation is something that he's certainly familiar with. Obviously, he's been directing for a number of years now, so he's not actively on the box as much as then, but he's still incredibly active. I mean, he's a huge fan of Unreal Engine, for example, and that was a lot of our kind of conversations at the beginning of this project. But I think the fact that he is familiar with the process of animation and visual effects makes a lot of our conversations through the entire process, from prep all the way through to finish, really easy. And so because of that, I think, because he's one of us, so to speak, I think there was a camaraderie within the entire team that was working on it here at Weta. And everybody just understood that we were all working on something quite special. And the thing that's also beautiful too is just he's got so much respect for the work that we've done. This is now his, I think he likes to say, 3.5 movies with us, not counting Mouse Guard that got canceled. But he gets our process. And he's just so incredibly proud of the work. And I mean, for all of us to hear him shouting from the rooftops how proud he is of the work that was done on the film is just a huge pat on the back. And it's kind of a beautiful contrast to so much of what we see these days, where filmmakers try to pretend that there's no visual effects in their movie. It's the polar opposite of that, and it's so refreshing.
So with that said, then, he also probably brought a different view of directing his actors, which in turn brings something different for when it comes to animating the apes and their performances. Did you have maybe a different rule or a different motto amongst the team when it came to animating the apes in this film compared to the previous ones?
No, not really, because I think what we're doing, I mean, our mission is to faithfully translate the intent of the performance of what the actors and Wes were working on together to find the truth in any given moment on the day. Our job was complicated, I guess, on this one a bit further, because all of our cast were speaking roles in this one, where there's a lot of sign language in the previous trilogy. There were certainly, you remember Bad Ape and chatty characters like that. But a lot of the setup for the Caesar trilogy was a lot of sign language, where here all of our new dozen hero level characters were all speaking roles. And so that requirement to have all of that heavy facial animation to support all that meant that we had to kind of find a more efficient way to deal with the facial animation process. And so for this film, for the first time on our ape characters, we rolled in the latest kind of version of our facial deep learning solver, which was kind of it really gave us a leg up in the sense that it took the movement of those dots on the actors' faces, and a neural network was essentially trained by the animators to learn the relationship between when an actor does this, it means their character does that, because it's never one-to-one mapping. And what that really gave us was, especially because as we went through the process, the essentially the brain, so to speak, of that neural net learned, as it was fed more and more material, it would get better and better at the first pass of that animation, which basically meant that our facial animators, all of their time was able to be spent focusing on the nuance and not the nuts and bolts, because that's where we found in the past where because all the previous films were still using, head-mounted cameras on our actors, and we had that reference there. But the actual animation itself was more of a hand keyframed to match that reference. Whereas here we could actually have, the facial solver take the first pass, and then the animator could pick up on top of that and just really focus on the subtleties. And for every moment in a performance on screen, we could spend all of our time talking about the effect of it all, the emotional sort of hit that we get from the actor. Am I getting the same emotional hit from the ape character? And if not, then we've still got some work to do.
Well, I love that you were able to capture all that extra nuance, because I mean, so many of these sequences, they really do pack. I mean, not that the first three didn't have plenty of emotion, but they do pack extra emotion for some of the apes in this film. And one such emotional sequence for me was Raka's death, which I mean, also was just stunning. And I know how much data water simulations require, let alone a rapid water simulation, in addition to, wet fur and all of that. I'd love to hear about putting that sequence together and sort of the challenges of making that one, not only look as good as possible, but also feel as real as possible.
For the river sequence, we have a scene here where our human character and Freya Allen playing May, she's got to be in the water with Raka as well. And so this was something we're going to need to have a real water, at least a section of fast-moving water that could be rushing past Freya to really amp up that and get her soaking wet. And then the challenge, of course, that was then having to take Peter Macon's performance, who was in the water with her, because obviously Raka helps her up to rescue her from that river. Here we wanted that water tank, and so our colleagues in the special effects department cooked up. We had a backlot set for a partial bridge that most of the scene takes place, and obviously once they end up in the water, they're in a real tank that had a big weir wall and pumps that were really kind of rushing water past the cast. From there, then it became the big challenge of working through the sequence and figuring out, for those close-up shots, how much of the real water were we going to keep and where do we need to start our digital extension. What it meant was we had to do basically a half a mile of river rapid simulations. And the way that our effects team had set that up, it allowed us to really art direct a lot of the water features in there, which is really important, because for that big that moment where we lose Raka, we had to set up earlier in the sequence that there was a very dangerous sort of body of water, some features there that he was possibly not going to survive if he were to lose it. And so the art directability of that scene was key as well. And I think, when it all came together, we wind up with, the effects department working with the creatures department, working with the animation department in a really kind of circular, really sort of connected and coupled sort of way, where effects department generated a low-res river simulation for that area around the bridge. Animation then used that to place where Raka was going to be in the water. When they sort of handed that off to our creatures team, who does the body simulation and the hair and all that stuff, that hair could reference the water flow that was in the river simulation to sort of direct how all of his long hair was moving. Once that was done, that went back to the effects department, because then they had to take that final high-res hair and then work through all of the water that he's fully saturated, right? And so we needed to simulate every time he lifted his arm out of the water, you need to see the water drain out of all of that hair and affect it as well. So is this very kind of, required a huge amount of collaboration and coordination and communication between all of the various departments at Weta that were contributing to that scene to keep things efficient. And then the funny thing was that moment you're speaking of, like Raka's last words to Noah in the movie, Wes changed his mind a couple of times in terms of what that was going to be, because we shot it one way in Australia, and then we did it again during some additional photography, pickups here in Wellington on the mocap stage. And then the final delivery of it, Wes, they were really working through this in the edit. Wes realized that we just need to make another change. And so he actually had Peter record himself on his phone. And that became the performance that we finally put in the movie. But all of that had to be worked into this complex process I was describing, with only just weeks to go before the end of our delivery process. So it was a lot of white knuckle ride towards the end of that shot, but it was so critically important for the emotional impact of that moment in the movie that it was absolutely worth doing.
Well, I'm glad you really stuck through it, those white knuckle moments, because I mean, that emotion and that moment really just sings in the film. And again, it broke my heart rewatching it earlier, but it is a very beautiful moment.
Together, strong.